Hello, I'm Jenny Miller, talking today to Carol Oddy on behalf of the Cheltenham Local History Society. Carol moved to Cheltenham in May 1961 and she's going to share with us some of her experiences and memories of living in Cheltenham in the early 60s. First of all, Carol, when you moved to Cheltenham, you went to Pate Grammar School. Tell us about how it was different from your school in Oxford.
Yes, it was very different, Jenny. The school I had in Oxford, the grammar school I went to in Oxford, was the headmistress there was an educator. She believed in the whole girl, rather than just cramming academic subjects. But in Cheltenham, it was a whole different atmosphere. There in Cheltenham, it was more of a crammer. I didn't like the atmosphere, and I just could not settle. I was 14 years old when I moved here, so I really started Pate's Grammar School at the beginning of the 2-year O-level syllabus, and I found very early on that there were subjects they were dealing with that I had dealt with in my second year in Oxford, and that they knew background stuff which I didn't know, which they had done in the second year. Therefore I had gaps in my knowledge, and somehow I could never catch up, and I could never quite settle. It was a whole different atmosphere, and very strange at that age to be uprooted into that situation.
From Pate's, you then went to Secretarial College, which we don't have nowadays. Tell us about the Secretarial College in Pittville.
Yes, it was called Phyllis Christie Secretarial College, run by the redoubtable Miss Phyllis Christie. Where, if you went to technical college, as it then was, you had 2 years to do a secretarial course. Miss Christie crammed it all into 6 months. In that 6 months, you were expected to learn Pitman's shorthand and Pitman's typing to a certain speed in both. You also were taught commercial English, basic bookkeeping, and how to deal with reading newspapers to glean information such as international news and stocks and shares, so that you could be your boss's mine of information. You were also taught to make sure that you knew exactly how your boss liked his tea and coffee. I left there after the 6 months, attaining eventually 40 words per minute typing, which of course was all done on a 7-beg manual typewriter, no electric typewriters in those days. And I also did 100 words a minute in Pitman's shorthand. One interesting point on that is that, of course, I'm left-handed. Now, if you're right-handed, it is very quick and easy to move your pencil by pulling it across the paper. If you're left-handed, you are pushing across the paper, which is amazingly slower than a right-handed person could do. So, therefore, I found getting my speeds up on shorthand very difficult. I got it there in the end, but it was extremely difficult to start with.
And a first job that you had was very interesting with Arcuprint. Tell us about who Arcuprint were and what your job was.
I was secretary to the manager at Arcuprint Services. They occupied an anonymous office in the centre of town, where they catalogued the nuclear submarines, Repulse and Renown. The drawings for these submarines were kept in the office. We had technical writers who were writing up the catalogues, and we had technical artists who were drawing the diagrams for the catalogues. And of course it was all very hush-hush, but fascinating work. No one would ever have known we were there or what we were doing in this anonymous little office. And I was there for probably 2 years.
And then you moved to the Leicester Permanent Building Society. Tell us about that.
Well, again, I was a secretary, so-called. There were only 3 members of staff at the branch of the Leicester Permanent Building Society, which was in the promenade. But there was a manager, and he had 2 secretaries, so-called. That was a euphemism to make sure that the women were paid on a much lower rate than the men. The tasks there were to do any secretarial jobs, but also to run the cashier counter. So we were dealing with the investments coming in, taking the money in, and marking up the pass books, as everyone had in those days, and also to deal with the mortgage applications. Now, it didn't take me long to realise that I was quite interested in mortgages. So gradually I was taught and learnt how to deal with mortgage applications, how to guide people in filling in their applications, how to deal with their status inquiries and the surveys and so on. And then when we had a change of manager, and the new manager didn't really know much about that side of things because he was an investments man, I just ran the mortgage side of it, merely asking him to sign the offers that I wasn't authorised to sign. And so therefore I ended up, after 2 years and at the tender age of 18 or 19, running the mortgage department for that particular branch.
Both of these jobs were based in the centre of Cheltenham. So what were your memories of the centre of Cheltenham, the High Street, the promenade? What were the shops, and what sort of shops were they?
The High Street, now that had a McFisheries, quite a big one actually, and it also had a couple of greengrocers and bakers and butchers. All this was down the lower High Street. And also, interestingly enough, very early in the 60s, a Tesco appeared, which in the building which now houses an optician's. That was the first supermarket to appear in Cheltenham, but of course they undercut everyone else, and so gradually the other shops disappeared. I can remember a lovely department store called Ward's, which is where Primark now is. It was in a beautiful old Georgian building, which was painted dark green and white. Lovely store, which used to send the cash up to the cashier in one of those vacuum tubes. When they closed down and they demolished the building, I can remember standing on the corner watching the wrecking ball and being quite upset, even at that young age, being quite upset that such a beautiful building was being knocked down. The other department store I remember very well was Shirers and Lances, which is where Lakeland and Blacks, etc. now are. Now, on the corner we always had Martin the Jewellers, that was still there then, but the whole of that island in the middle of the road, almost all of it was Shirers and Lances. In fact, I still call it the Shirers Island. And again, it was a department store. Largely, I seem to remember dealing with clothing, but they sold stuff that was affordable on a secretary's salary, as long as you only bought in the sales. But it was a fascinating shop and I loved it. I also remember Cavendish House, the original facade with the curved windows leading up to the arcade entrance doors, and going in and the old-fashioned way of everyone standing behind counters with the shelves and drawers behind the serving staff. They were all dressed in suits, of course, and looking awfully smart. And it was, again, I found a bit of a shame when that original facade was torn down, but of course absolutely impractical for modern day.
I believe as well there were two coffee shops in Cheltenham that competed with each other, Geraldine's and the Black Tulip. Tell us about Geraldine's and the Black Tulip.
Now, this does go back to when I was at school originally. Geraldine's was at the end of the municipal offices on the far right-hand corner, and the Black Tulip was at the other side of the road, on the other end of the municipal offices, where Prezzo now is on the ground floor. The Black Tulip had a coffee shop on the first floor, and Geraldine's had a coffee shop on the first floor, a restaurant on the ground floor, and a cafe in the basement. At the end of term at Pate's, last day of term, everyone went to one of the two coffee shops. I was always a Geraldine's girl. You were either a Geraldine's girl or you were a Black Tulip girl. So we'd go to the first floor coffee shop, have a general chat about music or whatever, and read each other's school report before taking them home to our parents. Later on, when I was working, I used to lunch in the cafe on the ground floor of Geraldine's because they did a very good, cheap lunch. They also took luncheon vouchers. And that was my haunt for lunch virtually every day while I was working in the centre of Cheltenham.
Thank you. In the early 60s, I believe the Beatles came to Cheltenham. Tell us about the two times that you saw the Beatles in Cheltenham.
This again goes back to when I was at school. A school friend and I fell madly in love with the Beatles ever so early on, before most people had ever heard of them. And we joined their fan club, which was our membership numbers were so low that clearly we were some of the first outside Liverpool to belong to this fan club. Now, in 1962, the Beatles came to play at the Odeon in Cheltenham. They were a support act. The headline act was Chris Montez, and my friend Sue and I got tickets to go. The Beatles closed the first half of the programme, and the Beatles were met largely with silence from everyone else. So the cinema was packed, but they were met largely with silence. And when they'd finished their set, there were only two of us going wild. The rest of them were just politely applauding. Now, scroll forward 12 months, and in 1963, the Beatles came back to Cheltenham. This time, they were the headline act. This time, the whole cinema was going wild all the way through their set, so much so that we couldn't hear a single note they were playing, which my friend and I were very upset about, because we actually wanted to hear them, because we were the true fans. We weren't just jumping on a bandwagon. And it's incredible how the difference in 12 months, how suddenly they became fashionable, suddenly the world was Beatle mad, and we always had been.
Thank you very much, Carol, for sharing your memories of Cheltenham with us.